Good evening. Tonight, I am going to be speaking about a relationship that I have with a certain person, and I say it in the present tense, even though it was just the 15th Yortzeit, the 15th anniversary of Rabbi Tessler's passing. So I want to talk about the significance of a very important person in my life and in the lives of many people who knew him, and maybe even somebody who changed the world in his own way. Rabbi Tessler's first name was Leopold. He was born in Czechoslovakia in 1911. When he was born in a shtetl, which is a little town, and to get an idea of what life was like in his youth. And then I'll introduce you, I'll circle back to introduce you to him, but I don't even know the name of the little village that he lived in. But one time I asked him, I said, "What did your father do?" He said, "My father was a shopkeeper." So I said, "Oh, a shopkeeper, that sounds good. What kind of store did he have?" He said, "He had a hole in the wall." I said, "What do you mean?" So he said he had a shop, but it was a shop typical of the shtetl, which was approximately 8 feet by 10 feet. It would be like a little stall. And I said, what did he sell? What did he do? He said he supported his 8 children through this store. I said, what did he sell? He said a customer would come in and said, "Give me a penny worth of nails, give me a penny worth of flour, give me 2 pennies worth of grapes," things like that. And if the customer spent a dime, that was a very big sale in that time. And he said that was what it took to support a family in the shtetl. You eked out a living. Just another example of life in the shtetl. Rabbi Tessler was a very good student in yeshiva, better than his brothers and sisters. So his mother wanted to reward him. She said, "Aryeh, I'm so proud of you. I have the best present in the world for you." And he was smiling and happy. He was probably 7 or 8 years old. And she said, "I have the best present in the world for you." And he said, "Yes, Mommy, yes, what is it?" And she reached in her apron and she pulled out an egg. She handed him a hard-boiled egg. And that was the present for being the star student. That was the present in the shtetl. That was the acknowledgement of hard work. And he said that even all of his life meant a lot to him, because it was from his mother. It was an acknowledgement, and she was giving everything she could give by giving him that egg. So I told you I'd circle back. My parents were also born in the shtetl, and I actually learned more about the shtetl from Rabbi Tessler than I did from my own parents. He was a generation older than them. My parents were born in the mid-1920s, and I told you he was born in 1911. My parents and he both went through the Holocaust, and during the Holocaust, he was taken as a slave laborer. The week of his wedding to Ethel was his wife's name, and they got married, and they had 1 or 2 Sheva Brochas, the first parties on the week of marriage. And the Hungarian Gestapo came to his village and picked him up and enslaved him and sent him to the Russian front. And he did not see his wife for at least 5 years. He never even knew if she was alive during those 5 years. It's a little longer than 5 years. But let me go back again. So I mentioned that my parents were also in this environment. My parents were much younger, and my grandparents were all killed in the Holocaust. I did not have any grandmother or grandfather, and I also didn't have any teacher. My parents both worked very hard. They assumed that I would get my education in public school or on my own. And it wasn't their job to educate me. They just said, it's our job to support you. I really missed having a teacher. I did not do well in school. I did not really connect with the teachers. And although I got by in school, I never had a student-teacher relationship. And I didn't have what I would consider, what I longed for in my heart was the relationship I would describe as having a grandfather to teach me about life, about Torah, about morals, to guide me in the world. And so it was. I figured things out. You know, we lived in the 50s and 60s. There was plenty of social action to follow. Everybody got all the cues. Everybody watched television and movies and listened to music. And in our social milieu, we learned what we thought was right and wrong. But I knew there was some layer of truth that I was missing. There was some layer of life that was being overlooked, and I didn't know what it was. That curiosity, that desire, eventually brought me to look back into my culture, to look back into whatever I didn't know what Torah was or Judaism was, other than a very superficial take on it. The reason I'm telling you this is because I had this strong, if you had to ask me what in my heart of hearts I really wanted to have a grandfather. I really wanted to have a relationship with an older man who would guide me and teach me and even show me what it is to feel as a elder, as a serious man, as what it would feel like as a man. I had a father. My father worked really hard. And when he came home, he sat in front of the television set. And I didn't realize that he and my mother just had PTSD, what we now know as PTSD, which is the effect of excessive trauma. When I finally met my teacher, Rabbi Tessler, and I won't go into the background of how I met him, it almost was like an accident, but there's no accidents in the world. And when I met him, he was curious about me. He met this young lawyer. I was one of many people who came to him. He was a sofer. I came to him to buy a set of tefillin. And I really didn't know a whole lot about tefillin, except I was at that point where I wanted to go to a minyan every day. And I was ready to wear tefillin. And he had them. So I called. Somebody gave me his number. I called. I said, "Do you sell tefillin?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Do you have any tefillin for," I think it was $150, whatever my budget was. He said, "Yes, come over." I said, I'm not used to somebody saying, "Yes, come over." I said, "When can I come over?" He said, "Now." Now, what I didn't realize was I was being introduced to a person who lived in the now. Rabbi Tessler was always, in the 25 years that I knew him, he lived in the now. There was never any time that he was not absolutely present. Everything that was important was happening now, or it was a preparation for something that was really important very shortly, like maybe building a sukkah or doing something regarding a mitzvah. But other than living in the now, either doing his work as a sofer, as a scribe, or teaching, and he would teach anybody who really had an interest in learning. He was devoted to his own learning. Now, one of the things about having a teacher is every teacher provides the student a lens to the world. And when I say a lens, there's ways to see the world through an intellect. There's ways to see it emotionally. There's ways to see it from what the ontological world is like. What is the world made out of? Is there gravity? Is there a political reality? Is there an emotional reality? Where do you stand intellectually? In terms of my relationship with Rabbi Tessler, there was really only two things that made a huge difference. He always knew how I felt. He always knew how I felt and what I was feeling. And he always knew what the appropriate thing to teach me was. When I would come in, he would know exactly, like if you went to the doctor, he would know where to open the book. He would know what subject to teach today. He would know what story to tell. He would know what to talk about, as if this was some scene from a movie. And I never actually knew what we were going to learn next. We had some regular Seder, they call it, regular order of learning, but it was never strict. It was always something unusual. It was always some story or some place he needed me to take him, or something that was happening, something that needed to be addressed. And all that always was relevant to how I felt and how he wanted me to share that feeling with him. Because as I told you, he always knew how I was feeling. I'll give you an example. There's a million examples, but one day I came to see him. I came from some court somewhere, and I came to sit down. He says, "What's the matter?" I said, "Rabbi, nothing's the matter." He said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Rabbi, I'm fine. Everything is good." He said, "Sit down and tell me what's going on. What's the matter?" So finally, I couldn't avoid it. I said, "I'm a little nervous, a little anxious." He said, "You're anxious? What are you anxious about?" I said, "I'm anxious about Parnassa." For those of you who don't know what Parnassa is, it's money. It's your livelihood. It's how much money you're making to pay your bills. So he said, "Oh, I understand. Parnassa. That's a big concern." He said, "Well, come upstairs and I'll make you some lunch and we can talk about it over lunch." So I came upstairs to in his duplex, and he sat me down. He said, "Have you eaten today?" I said, "Rabbi, yes, I had breakfast." He said, "Are you sure you've eaten today?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Do you have food for dinner? When you go home, do you have food in your house?" I said, "Yes." He said, "So what's the problem? You said you had a problem for Parnassa." I said, "Yes, I have food, but I don't understand what you're saying." He said, "Parnassa means when you say you have a worry, if you have had breakfast, if you have food in your tummy, and you have something in your house to eat, you don't have a Parnassa problem. You have a faith problem. You have a problem of worrying too much. You have a problem that you don't trust that the Creator is taking care of you. That's the problem. It's not Parnassa. You have Parnassa because you have food in the refrigerator." So that was, that was a way of grounding me to say the feeling that I had is true, but I was labeling it as something else. And one of the reasons I could, he understood this was because he had been hungry a lot. He had been in the war. He had been in slave labor. He had been in ready to be taken to the firing squad a number of times, to be beaten to death, to be shot and killed. And every time that this almost happened, he was miraculously saved. One of those events was, when the Nazis, when the Hungarians or the Germans themselves took Jews as slaves into the into Russia in the winter of I think it was 42, 41. They sent out the Jews to build trenches or to explode landmines. They'd send them out so that they would be walking in the fields so that the landmines would explode on them instead of the Germans. And because they sent the Jews out, the Jews were able to escape sometimes. And Rabbi Tessler was this person who was always looking to escape. He always found a way to get away. But unfortunately, he got caught a number of times. And when you would run away and get caught, they would execute you. On this one time, he told me, he was in a room with a number of men. They were waiting to go to the firing squad. And the men were moaning and screaming and crying. And there was bedlam in this room, in this place. And it was terrible. And Rabbi Tessler found a place on the floor and he laid down and he went to sleep. Went to sleep. And he had a dream. And he dreamed that he went back home to his parents' village. And there in front of his parents' house was an apple tree. He went up on the roof of the house, and the tree was full of apples, and the branch was leaning over the roof. And he started picking apples and sticking them in his pockets and sticking them in his shirt. And he says, I have to bring apples to Ethel. Ethel really I need to bring this to her. She says, she's really hungry. I'm sure I have to bring this to her. And he's just so busy picking apples until somebody kicks him and says, Tessler, get up. They're taking us out. They're going to kill us now. And they said, why are you sleeping? What's wrong with you? So he sees a tall man comes and opens the door. He sees the doors open and he gets up and he runs out of the room. He just gets up and runs out of the room past the man at the door. And everybody's like watching him and he escaped. And I think the guard was just one guard and he didn't know what to do. He didn't, he was supposed to bring the men to the firing squad. And Rabbi Tessler escaped. And this kind of thing happened to him regularly, which may explain why the reason I liked him, or the reason it was important to meet such a person, was because he did not express fear. He did not express fear. Did that mean that he didn't have feelings? No, he had lots of feelings. Definitely showed me love. He definitely loved his wife. But he did not become afraid. Now, somebody might say somebody who's faced death many times is not going to be afraid of, an accident. He's not going to be afraid of something happening, something in the world. He said, I've lived through other things. I'll live through this. But he did have a fear. They call it God-fearing. He always was really, really respectful of Creator. And to him, that was the only thing in the world to fear. That was the only thing that was worthy of having huge respect and fear. And when I talk about fear, I don't mean fear like God's going to punish me or something like that, but it's fear from knowing that somebody knows exactly what you feel, knows exactly what you're doing, and to live a life where you don't make excuses. You don't make any excuses. And that was this man that I spent 25 years learning with. And I wish I could say he made a bigger dent in my life, so to speak, but at least now I'm happy that I can share that with you. Um, you know, when you know somebody, you know them by their relationships, the relationships they have with the people close to them. And I saw Rabbi Tessler as by the way, he lived in a very simple place. He had a converted little room next to his garage, which was his study. And in that room was where he did his sofras, his writing Torahs and tefillin and mezuzahs. And it's also where he met people for learning in this little old room, an old converted part of a garage. Yet in that room, I saw him give away masses of money. Whatever money he had, he gave away. When poor people would come, he would give them money. When people were collecting for yeshivas or charities, he gave them huge amounts of money. I couldn't figure out how he did it, but I know that he had a duplex, and he gave away all the rent that he got from his neighbor, from his tenant. That for sure he gave away. But he also gave away all the money he made. He just did not keep money. He gave it away. One day, maybe he was already in his late 80s, I came to see him and he said, "Milton, I have a problem." I said, "Rabbi, what can I do for you?" He says, "Milton, I have a problem." I said, "Anything, Rabbi." I knew he was getting old. Maybe I could do something for him. He says, "I have $2,000 and I want to give $500 to charity. How much money will I have left?" And I thought, oh man, poor guy is losing his seichel. He doesn't know anymore, how much money he's got. I said, "Rabbi, you'll have $1,500. He looks at me, he says, "No, I'll have $500. And I'm thinking, what's he talking about? He says, the $500 I give, that money, I know where it went, and that money I will always have. But the $1,500, the other part of that 2,000, that's gone. That's spent. That's spent on utilities and rent and rent, but taxes and who knows what else." It says that is gone. It's disappeared. But the $500 and everything I ever give away, that money is my money. That's what I have forever. I really feel like he lived like that with his wife. And I don't mean that there's more than loyalty to a wife. There is this idea of my wife is my life. My wife, and I'm not saying they had a perfect relationship. They had, a normal amount of disharmony for, an older couple. They never had children. So it was just them. But because they had gone through so much together and he had cared for her so long, his love was so deep from caring for her for so many decades that I don't think I've ever seen a truer love. And it wasn't a love like a romantic love. It was a love just from caring for somebody, for taking care of somebody, for making sure their needs were met. That was what impressed me. And when his wife passed away, he would be a typical candidate to leave this world. She died about 5 years before he did. And her loss was like, you see two doves. So you say when one dove passes away, the other dove sometimes passes away very quickly after that. But the saving grace he had was his Talmidim, his students. So the other love he had in his life was the love for people who came to him, who needed him as a teacher, as a guide, as somebody to teach them how it feels to be a Jew, how it feels to know their Creator, how it feels to walk in the world not as a fearful person, not as a doubtful person, not as a scared person, but as a person who knew their bearings in the world, who could be thrown to any place and time in the universe and be dropped down and know exactly where they are and what they need to do and how to proceed. And that's what he wanted to teach us, me and his other students, was really how to live. And he did that by, I told you, number one, he always knew how we felt. So we knew that he really paid attention to us. We knew when somebody knows how you feel all the time, you know you're not lost. You know you're not ownerless. You know that there's somebody who cares about you. And it wasn't as if I was his child or his blood relative. I was somebody who needed guidance. I was somebody who wanted to learn. And I was somebody who he wanted to give his knowledge and the knowledge of Torah and God to. I mentioned this idea of knowing oneself. So they say if you want to be wise in this world, you have to know yourself. But how do you know yourself? So we're so often busy pleasing other people, trying to fit in, accommodating, trying to be politically correct, busy with our work, making a living, that how do we ever really know ourselves? So sometimes it takes somebody else who knows us, who gives us feedback, somebody who bumps into us and reminds us that we feel, somebody who tests us and challenges us to know where the limits of our belief is, somebody who questions our morality, not for the sake of doing it maliciously, but for the sake of saying, where do you stand? What's important? And this happened a number of times. I'll give you two major examples. Often we'd be learning the laws of davening or different halachas, they call it, different laws of daily life. And Rabbi Tessler would learn something with me. He said, do you do this? I said, no. He says, no. He says, do you say this prayer? I said, no. He says, no. I say, I don't do it because where I live in Venice, we don't do it. He says, oh, you don't do it in Venice. Well, I respect Rabbi Lappin. That's fine. If you don't do it there, that's no problem. He says, we're learning this is something people do. But if your rabbi doesn't expect you to do that, or he's not telling you to do that, you do what your rabbi tells you to do where you live. You do what the custom is where in your life. It's not my job to tell you what to do or how to live. The other example, I don't know why it's skipping my mind. Oh, I know what it was. It's a really important example. Often he would send me to the store. He was older. I met him when he was almost 70, and I learned with him until he was 95. So a lot of times I would come and he'd say, can you run to the store for me to get you something? I need some tomatoes and some grapes and some wine or something else. I bring it, and I'd put it on the table, and he'd say, how much was it? I say, Rabbi, I got it. Let me pay for it. He says, no, I want you to pay. I want to pay for it. I said, Rabbi, here, he says, how much was it? And I don't want to tell him. He starts yelling at me. I insist. How much was it? I said, it's $4. It's not $4. Exactly how much it was. $4.17. So he goes and gets his wallet and starts laying out the money. I said, Rabbi, don't give me the money. Please, you're so generous to me. You give me learning all the time. You feed me. You love me. You take care of me. I don't want to take your money. He says, I'm giving you the money. Take the money. And this happened over and over and over again. So one day, after many years, and the same scenario happened, he says, Milton, I'm now 90 years old, and I have to tell you, I don't know how long I'm going to live, but I have to tell you the truth. I said, Rabbi, what's the truth? He said, you're a stingy man. I said, Rabbi, what did I do? He says, you are the stingiest man in the world. I said, Rabbi, what? I don't understand. He says, you took my money. He says, you every time you charge me, he says, I learned with you for 25 years, 20 some odd years. I feed you, I do everything for you. You can't even buy me a gift. You can't even give me a tomato. What's wrong with you? I said, Rabbi, I tried to give it to you. I tried to, I didn't want to take your money. He says, who made you do it? Who made you do it? If I said you did, he said, you didn't have to put it in your pocket. You didn't have to take it. You gave up. You're a stingy man. He says, you cannot be married if you're a stingy man. You have to work on that quality. He says, I don't care if I spit in your face. The point is, you should not have taken that money, not one penny. And you could have done it, but you took the money. And I want you to know that I've been testing you over and over. And now you know that. And that was only one of the tests he did. When I first met him, it was the Passover of 1981. And I was learning with him a few months, and I spent Passover with him, Pesach with him. First time I actually, maybe I'd already started keeping Shabbos. I don't remember. I probably did. But I spent Pesach at his house. So I ate one of the Seders at his neighbor's, a neighbor of his, an older man, also his age. And somehow he had talked to them. I didn't know what had happened. The next morning, we're walking to shul, and he said, Milton, how was dinner last night? I said, dinner, Seder, it was very nice. He said, I heard you had a plumbing problem. I said, what do you mean a plumbing problem? He said, I heard you had a plumbing problem. I said, I don't know what you're talking about. He said, you were overflowing at the table. He said, you were blabbing at the table. You were talking about yourself at the table. He says, I heard from my friend, you need to learn derech eretz. Your mouth was just talking and talking and talking about yourself and talking. He says, that's a plumbing problem. It's not the derech eretz you need. He would give me feedback like that. Now, he didn't punish me or anything like that, but he was a little rough with me. But he always gave me feedback. And the thing about it was he wasn't afraid that I would stop being his Talmud, that I would go away, that I would not love him anymore. His job was to be himself to be my teacher and to be who he was. I don't know why this story, this is a story I heard. Actually, I didn't even hear it from him. I saw a video when he was at the end of his life, he had caretakers. And one of the caretakers would record conversations with Rabbi Tessler. And I have a video or tape, I don't remember. I think it's a video. And he's talking about, he was drafted into the Czech army when he was a young man in the 1920s. And I don't know if I told you this, but he was a very strong man. He was not very tall. He was probably about 5'4". But he was a guy who was 5'4", who was like 6'5". I mean, he was a guy who had that presence, like nobody messed with this man. I told you I met him when he was 70. He would still ride his bike wherever he was going. He would chop wood in the backyard. He would climb on his roof to fix what he needed to do. There was nothing he didn't do. And you look at this man, he's, looks like a rabbi with a white beard, but you look at his hands, and his hands were real hands. They were strong hands. They looked big, strong hands because he had always done physical work. And you knew those hands were strong. And they represented the strength in him. The strength that he said, I'm devoting this strength not through my hands, but through my heart to you. I'm going to stop if anybody has any questions for a minute or two before I go on. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, go ahead.
Milton, I've been wondering if you know some of his other Talmidim and if you still learn together with them.
Yes, I do. My friend John Pollitt is here in the Zoom with us tonight. There's a number of people. He had, over the 25 years, there were hundreds of people who learned with him, but there was probably a group of about 20 people who were closer, and then even a smaller group of maybe 10 people. But right now, there's probably about 10 people that I know who are around the country, around the world, who we get together. His Yort site was last week. John did a Zoom class, so we do get together and we honor his memory. Anything else? So let me just say something else here. It's a funny thing, we don't think about how many people are around who need to be recognized. In the 60s and 70s, there were a lot of young Jewish men in particular who did not have any Jewish anchor. They did not have anything to anchor them to traditional Jewish life, or particularly any higher Jewish education. We all got sucked into the secular system. We went to college, we went to high school, we kind of left whatever Judaism in our past or, in the closet. But occasionally there were young people who, either because their parents didn't give them support, they found Rabbi Tessler. And there was one guy named Yaakov who I remember, he must have been 13 or 14 years old. And he really wanted to learn Torah. And this was like 1982. And he came to Rabbi Tessler as often as he could. And Rabbi Tessler would feed him. And if he needed clothes, Rabbi Tessler would buy him clothes. And when the day came that the Yaakov wanted to go to yeshiva, Rabbi Tessler, he asked his parents to go to yeshiva. His parents said, we're not paying a penny for yeshiva. So Rabbi Tessler said, I'll pay for it. And this is something that he did for a number of people. But I remember the first time I saw it, I couldn't believe it, that he was stepping in as like an uncle or a grandparent or, somebody, and said, this person needs this. I'm going to foot the bill. I'm going to take care of this person. I'm going to learn with this person. I'm going to facilitate their whatever they need spiritually in whatever way I can. There's a rabbi named Rabbi Irons, who's a Rosh Yeshiva in, I think it's in Detroit. And Rabbi Irons is older than I am. Rabbi Irons met Rabbi Tessler in the same way during the 1960s. And he came from a secular home. He wasn't Rabbi Irons, then he was Stevie or whatever his name would be. And somehow, maybe he came for bar mitzvah lessons, because parents still would send their sons for bar mitzvah lessons to a Rebbe. And that's all they expected. Just get through the bar mitzvah, let them go, forget about it, let's go on. But this Rabbi Irons, Stevie, came to, I don't know if his name is Stevie, but something like that, came to Rabbi Tessler, and he was one of these young men who Rabbi Tessler sent to yeshiva. And he supported him for years, and he gave him moral support. Well, Rabbi Irons became the head of a major yeshiva in Detroit, Michigan. And to this day, Rabbi Irons speaks of his gratitude to Rabbi Tessler for, giving him a chance to develop his Torah education and to give it over to other people. We talk about what honesty is. I told you that Rabbi Tessler was very honest to me, but in all the years I knew him, he was absolutely honest. Absolutely. I mean, he didn't mess with the truth at all, even if it was against his interest. If he had to pay something, he would pay it. If he had to admit he was late or he was wrong, he would do it. He had no fear of being wrong. In fact, again, the only fear that he had was that he wasn't doing Hashem's will as much as he could. He said, I'm given certain things in this world, my time, my mind, the learning that I have, the food that I have, whatever I have, and I'm given that to give over to other people. And that's the only thing that he said, if I breach that, that would be a major breach for him. But nothing else was worth, messing with. If he had to pay something, pay a ticket, do something else, he would just do it. There was no extra stuff about him, no stories about him. As I mentioned, I saw him give away tens of thousands of dollars. Personally, I saw him give away money. There was a man named Schwartzy. Many of you knew who Schwartzy is. His name is Rabbi Schwartz, passed away about 5 years ago. Zecher Tzadik Lebracha. I met Schwartzy at UCLA. He was on the campus. He had one of these tables where he originally was part of Chabad, and he would introduce people to Judaism, maybe try to put tefillin on people or engage people in conversation. Schwartzy was became like a hippie rabbi, but Schwartzy knew thousands of people. And everybody who needed tefillin, he would say, do you want to wear tefillin? The person would say, yes. He says, but I can't afford it. Or the person wouldn't buy it. So Schwartzy would go to Rabbi Tessler and say, Rabbi, I have a young man who needs tefillin. He says, okay, here's some tefillin. He would just give it to him. He had recycled tefillin, or he'd write a pair of tefillin. Whatever was necessary, he would give it. If Schwartzy asked for it, Schwartzy would walk out. Tefillin are not cheap. They cost money. But he knew if Schwartzy asked for it, Schwartzy was the pipeline. It was a pipeline for Rabbi Tessler to the outside world. Whatever other rabbis knew that Rabbi Tessler would provide whatever they needed for a mitzvah, or to help somebody to continue their spiritual growth. Anyway, I don't want to go on indefinitely, but I do want to say that those of us who learned with Rabbi Tessler directly, including my children, by the way, every one of my children knew. I made sure they knew Rabbi Tessler from the time they were born. He would come over and hold them. He would, if I had a son, he did the bris. If I had a daughter, he would come over and kiss them and hug them and whatever. I made sure that all of my children would know him, and they were afraid of him because he was a tough critter, tough guy. He was a tough guy, but they understood that this was their father's Rebbe. This was the man who made their life possible. This is the man who changed me from being a garden variety Jew to maybe a more conscious person through the time I spent with him. So my children, as much as I could possibly get them to go, learned with Rabbi Tessler. And all of my children today, Kanai Nahora, are religious, are, happy as Jews, are devoted as Jews. And I feel that that's a gift that Rabbi Tessler gave to my wife and I, to be able to have a home where we raise children and grandchildren, many grandchildren, who were devoted Jews. And it's not because of the Torah, it's because of the selflessness that we learned the Torah through the lens of selflessness, the Torah through the lens of somebody who came through hardship and knew what life meant, the lens of a Jew, of every generation of Jew who came before us. And when you have Torah through that lens, that Torah is different than just learning Torah out of a book, or learning Torah in a class where people are chewing gum and they don't particularly care about it. So, you got to pay with your skin like I did. You pay with your devotion, and it's worth it. So thank you, Rabbi Tessler. Thank you all for being here tonight. And I hope to see you again in 2 weeks. Thank you.